Hello and welcome to Dark Tower YouTube. This is an introduction video to the channel where I'm going to be talking about what you're doing here. Why are we all here? So let's start by talking about what is the Dark Tower. The Dark Tower is a 7-book series written by Stephen King. It spans a timeline of about 30 years that he spent writing these 7 books. It's massive. It's 4,000 something pages. It's a big endeavor. So that is what it is. Where did Stephen King get the idea to write it? Well, he was inspired by The Lord of the Rings. He really enjoyed that series growing up and was reading that a lot and thought, I want to write this, just my version of this. And I feel like he succeeded because the breadth and scope of this world that he manages to create is just astounding and breathtaking. The heart of the characters is absolutely there in a way that I have never found reproduced in another book. These characters have my heart and soul wrapped up with them. So much so that I weep when I read this series. Even the 5th time, 6th time, 7th time I'm reading it, I just am so connected to these people that he's created. I've never read the Lord of the Rings in full, and I will. I'm going to. I have seen all of the movies. I know this is, don't turn me off yet, please. This is unpopular opinion that the movies are fantastic. But that's just to say that I understand what the Lord of the Rings is about and some of the themes in that book, and the heart of the characters is a big deal. And so I know that there are reflections of that series in Stephen King's magnum opus, his self-proclaimed magnum opus. He also was inspired by the Robert Browning poem, Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came. I have a different video I'm going to make all about that poem, so stay tuned for that. But this poem, written in the 19th century, has inspired a ton of other art. So it's inspired other stories, it's inspired paintings. I have one hanging on my wall, I'll show you sometime. It's inspired television shows. It's massive. This poem is just, it's a psychological, dark masterpiece. It's quite horrific in some ways, and so I can get why Stephen King really liked this poem and how other people who read it, it just kind of awakens the darker parts of your mind and makes them ask a lot of questions and start theorizing on what's really going on here. So that poem also inspired Stephen King. He started writing these books when he was 19 years old, and he wrote The Gunslinger, which is the first book in the series, as part of a serial, a 5-part serial that was published in a sci-fi magazine. And probably by the end, he figured out he wants to keep going with this and see what happens next to the main character. He wrote them over 30 some odd years. So starting with The Gunslinger, which I think he started in the mid-1970s, it was finally published in like 1979. I'm not 100% sure of these dates, but the last book was published in 2003, just to give you an idea of how long this took and how he was writing a million other things as he was writing this series, and started drawing those other stories into the Dark Tower, just having everything being interconnected, which is super cool. I'll also make a video about the reading order, which is this whole controversial thing that I have some opinions about. But anyway, a massive undertaking to write and a massive undertaking to read, so we could be here for a year or longer, kind of diving in, reading, and doing a deep look at what's going on. I love this series so much. So why are we here? Why am I here? Because I love it. I've read it from start to finish at least 4 times, maybe 5. I've lost track. And the Gunslinger, the first book and the second book, I've read more than that because I would reread them when another book was coming out. Every time I read it, I pick up on something new and my mind is blown and my spiritual mind is opened up. And by spiritual, I just mean extra physical. So we could say psychological, and I'm going to use that word a lot because sometimes spiritual scares people. Psychological is extra physical. So these are really the same things. We're talking a lot about psyche, thoughts, mind, consciousness, and how that impacts our behavior, the things that we can visibly see and taste, smell, sense, etc. So spiritual, extra physical, metaphysical, psychological, that's my interest in life. That's what I like to philosophize about. That's what I'm on about all the time. And this book has got all of those things covered and then some. So the last time I read it, I was wanting to talk about it so badly with somebody, anybody, but not a lot of my friends have read the series. And so I had to say, well, maybe I need to find some people who have. And I am active on the Reddit threads, but I like to talk and I want to hear what you have to say. And who knows if we'll have guests on the show or a co-host someday, or Zoom meetings. I'm open to all of that. Yeah, you have to start somewhere. So here's where I'm starting. But I love this. This is my favorite series of all time. I'm going to call it a story because it is one story. And it opens my heart up every time. I weep every time that I read it, even though I know what's coming, what's going to happen. It leaves me in puddles. And it just has a profound impact on my own psychological, spiritual development. And I want to show you how it can perhaps have that on yours. Which brings me to my lens is going to be a psychological / spiritual / metaphysical, magical religious way of looking at this story. Because all of those things are in here in great depth and breadth. I was inspired because I want to do it, because I love it so much. But also, there's another podcast called The Kingslingers, and they're fantastic. If you have not listened to them, go listen to them. They do all 7 books as well. They're very literary and they're writers and big readers. And so their lens is very literary and looking at the writing and the themes. And we're going to do that too. We have to do that because this is like a book club discussion. So we're going to have a Stephen King book club discussion here. So we will be looking at those literary aspects, but that's not my area of expertise. So I think I'm good enough at that to have a show about it. But what I'm really good at is psychological dealings because I'm a counselor. So that's my natural lens on life and the way that I like to really dig in and look at what's going on in their head. What are they trying to do and how is that working for them? And how is that reflecting me? Like, how am I being reflected back in this person? The people in our world are mirrors to us. I do believe that. So we're really going to be digging in that sense and putting ourselves into the shoes of these characters. I'll be asking you some big psychological questions as the characters ask themselves these questions, and we'll have a lot of empathy for them because we are the same. And Stephen King is writing what he knows and reflecting back to us who we are, who he is, who I am, who you are, who the world is in this story. So we'll really be looking at those huge overarching extra physical themes through my lens. I will be not spoiling anything. So this is a show that's for anybody who has not read the series yet. If you have read the series, I'll definitely be making some extra videos just for us who understand the whole thing and how does it all end up. And there's a reason why people come back and read this series again and again. I am definitely not the only one. I call these people tower junkies, and you all know why. You all know who you are and you know why. But there is a draw to this book in terms of you do get something different the second time you read it, the third time you read it, the 50th time you read it. So it's very special like that. But the main videos are not going to have spoilers. I will be directing your attention to things, pulling things out, saying, let's look at that again. Let's think more closely about that. I think the author is asking us to look more closely at that. Look what he did here. What does that mean? What is he trying to say? So I will be focusing your attention differently than you might be having it focused if you were reading it on your own. And so you have to decide, do you want to read this book with a guide, or do you want to read it blind and then come back and go through with a guide? That's up to you. I won't be spoiling anything, but I'm just trying to say, don't get mad at me if I'm pointing your attention to something that makes you think differently about it. The way that I like to think about it is there are some movies that I just want to go in fresh. I don't want anybody talking to me about it. I don't want to know anything about it. I want to get through it and then go back and watch it again, and then go read the commentaries, come up with what I think is happening. And then there are times when I want to watch it with my best friend, and I want to watch it with a group of people, and I want to pause it and say, what did he just say? Hang on a second. Isn't that the guy from before? Oh my gosh, can you believe that that just happened? It just depends on my mood and what I want. So decide what you want to do with this series. If you'd like to do it together, I would love to do this together with you. But I won't be spoiling what happens next, what comes later, how things work out. You won't be getting spoilers throughout this series. This is an adult themed book. I mean, not really. I should say that differently. This is a book for grown-ups. This is not really for little kids. There are some adult themes in these stories, and I'll be reading out loud some of the things that are happening. So be forewarned. You might not want to listen to this with kids around or at work. I myself have been known to curse and cuss when it feels good to do so. So there will be some language at some points in this show. So just be ready for that. The Gunslinger is book number 1, and we have an unrevised edition and a revised edition. I'm going to be talking about the revised edition. So what is this all about? Well, Stephen King wrote this when he was 19, and it took him 30 odd years to write the whole thing. And when he finished, he was like, I need to tighten up that first book a little bit. I wrote it a long time ago. It's a little too loosey-goosey for what happens over the arc now that I know how everything works out. And I'm a different writer now. I've written whatever 50, 60 books by that point, maybe more. And I'm a better writer now than I was when I was 19. So maybe I can go back and just tighten up the language a little bit. Not too much. He said I didn't want to disrespect that 19-year-old who had the guts to write this thing, to start it. But he does change a little bit in the language, and he does add about, I forget how many words. Anyway, he adds some stuff to book number 1 in the revised edition, which tie everything together long term. If you have the unrevised edition, you can read this. You might be confused at some points when I'm talking about something that's not in your edition, but that's okay. It's not going to ruin anything for you long term. It's totally okay if that's what you have. If you haven't bought anything yet, get the revised edition, which is going to have this one has the Dark Tower movie on there. And it doesn't say it's revised, but you can tell by when it was published. So it's hard to find these unrevised editions these days, but you can find them for not too much money. But just be aware that there's 2 different versions out there. We'll be doing the revised edition of this book. The other thing I want to say is that this is a controversial book, and some people who love Stephen King hate the Gunslinger. Some people who love the Dark Tower hate the Gunslinger. Some people love the Gunslinger and then don't really enjoy the rest of the series. That's more rare, I would say. It's usually people who are like, this book is weird. This is a weird book. And it is a weird book. It is totally different than anything you've ever read by Stephen King. for better or worse, you're going to be getting involved with all kinds of literary genres. I mean, throughout this whole series, we're going to be every single genre of fiction that is out there, we're probably getting into in some way, shape, or form. And the Gunslinger has quite a few in there on its own. So that's pretty fun and cool. But just know that the start of the book is a particular thing, and as it moves, you're feeling like this is not like anything I've ever read before. This isn't like Stephen King. This is not a horror book. What's going on here? I don't understand. That's okay. There are some people who say you can just, if you're feeling that way about the Gunslinger, just skip it, jump into book 2. If you're halfway through book 2 and you don't love it, the series is not for you. But give it a real shot at book 2. And you can do that. You can just come to my weekly, bi-weekly, whatever, shows for each chapter and get caught up to speed on what's going on, what are we talking about, what are our characters doing, and be ready to move into book 2. And then when you finish the whole series, go back and read The Gunslinger is what I would recommend. Or just know that the whole rest of the series is very different than The Gunslinger. The Gunslinger is its own thing, and it's really just setting the stage for what's to come. It has a totally different vibe than the rest of the books. It's not a very funny book, so I'll put that out there, whereas some of the other books can have quite a bit of humor in them. Anyway, give it a chance. Give it a chance. If you don't love it or if you hate it, hang in for book 2 with me, because a lot of people change their mind even a couple of pages into the second book in the series. Okay, I think that is good for an introduction. I think we understand what the Dark Tower is, what we're going to be doing with it that's different from other shows. This is going to be a book club discussion, so I want you guys with me, reading along, talking to me, commenting. There will be no spoilers, but there will be some cussing. I hope to see you and hope to hear from you. I wish you long days and pleasant nights until we meet again.